What if the most powerful foods for your body were never locked inside expensive bottles, stacked on pharmacy shelves, or advertised during primetime television? What if they were sitting on your kitchen counter, growing in an old pot by the window, or quietly waiting in a forgotten corner of someone's backyard garden? Here is the thing most people do not realize. While modern life has handed us convenience, it has quietly taken something else. It has taken the knowledge our great-grandparents carried without even thinking about it. Knowledge about what to eat when the body was struggling. Knowledge about which foods had been trusted for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years before a single supplement was ever manufactured. Ancient people did not have pharmacies. They had kitchens. They had gardens. They had observations passed down through generations of careful attention to what worked, what helped, and what kept families strong through hard winters and difficult years. And now, quietly, modern research is starting to catch up to what those people already knew. Studies are being published, compounds are being identified, and one by one, traditional foods that were once treated as common household staples are being rediscovered for exactly the reasons they were first valued. Today, I am going to take you through 15 of those foods. 15 ancient foods that were trusted, traded, grown, dried, stored, and eaten by people who had nothing but nature and experience to guide them. Stay with me, because number 8 on this list was once one of the most traded foods in the ancient world, and people used it for far more than flavor. And the one that closes out this list? It might be sitting on your kitchen shelf right now, and most people have no idea how deeply it was respected by traditional healers across multiple continents. If you want forgotten food wisdom, practical health science, and self-sufficient living ideas delivered every week, hit that subscribe button now, because you do not want to miss what is coming next. Now, let's get into it. Number 1. Raw honey, the eternal preservative. There is a fact about honey that stops most people cold when they hear it for the first time. Archaeologists excavating ancient tombs have found sealed jars of honey that were over 3,000 years old. And when they were opened, the honey was not spoiled, it had not fermented, it had not rotted. It was still, remarkably, edible. That is not a coincidence. That is chemistry. And it is the same chemistry that made honey one of the most valued healing substances in ancient households across Egypt, Greece, the Mediterranean, and Asia. Traditional healers and early farmers used raw honey on wounds. They packed it into cuts and burns to prevent infection and speed recovery. They stirred it into warm drinks to soothe sore throats. They blended it with herbs to carry other plant medicines deeper into the body. It was not just food. It was the first aid kit in a jar. Modern research has given us the language to explain why it worked. Raw honey contains hydrogen peroxide, produced naturally when it contacts moisture. It contains methylglyoxal, a compound studied for its antimicrobial activity. It has a low water content and high acidity that make it structurally hostile to bacterial growth. It contains flavonoids and polyphenols that have been studied for antioxidant activity. And research suggests that raw, unprocessed honey may help support the body's response to minor throat irritation, wound care, and digestive comfort. The key word is raw. Processed commercial honey has often been heated and filtered to the point where many of its naturally occurring compounds are significantly reduced. What traditional healers valued was not the sweetness, it was the full, unprocessed product. People on old homesteads kept a jar of raw honey in the pantry year-round, not just as a sweetener, as a staple. A first resort when someone was feeling under the weather or dealing with a cut that needed protecting. Use it stirred into warm water with lemon when a throat feels scratchy. Apply a small amount to minor cuts and scrapes on clean skin. Choose local, raw, unfiltered honey when you can find it. One important note: raw honey should never be given to infants under 12 months. This is a well-established safety guideline and should always be followed. Think of raw honey as nature's oldest preservative because in more ways than one, that is exactly what it is. Number 2, garlic, the underground pharmacy. Garlic has been cultivated for over 5,000 years. That is not a health trend. That is a track record. Ancient Egyptians fed garlic to the workers building the pyramids, reportedly to maintain their strength and endurance. Ancient Greek athletes consumed it before competition. Roman soldiers carried it as a field staple. Traditional healers across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East reached for garlic when treating infections, respiratory issues, and sluggish digestion. It was not admired because it tasted good. It was valued because generation after generation observed what it seemed to do. The compound that makes garlic remarkable is called allicin, and it is released when garlic is crushed or chopped and the cell walls are broken. Allicin and its related sulfur compounds have been extensively studied. Research suggests they may have antimicrobial, antifungal, and anti-inflammatory properties. Studies have looked at garlic's potential role in supporting cardiovascular health, specifically in relation to blood pressure and cholesterol levels. Other research has explored its influence on immune function. This is not marketing. These are directions that modern science continues to investigate because the historical record gave researchers good reason to look. Traditional use was straightforward. Garlic was eaten raw, cooked into foods, crushed into preparations with other ingredients, or sometimes applied externally in poultice form for certain skin concerns. In some old household traditions, a clove of garlic was sliced and the cut surface was pressed gently against a cold sore or insect bite. For practical everyday use, crushing or mincing garlic and letting it sit for about 10 minutes before cooking is said to allow the enzyme reaction that forms allicin to complete. Many traditional recipes called for raw garlic added at the end of cooking or eaten directly. If you only grow one thing in a home garden, garlic is a serious contender. It is low maintenance, stores well when properly dried, and has one of the longest histories of any cultivated food plant on Earth. It is not just a flavor. It is a 5,000-year-old habit worth keeping. Number 3. Turmeric, the golden root. If you had walked into a traditional household in South Asia, Southeast Asia, or parts of the Middle East and Africa several hundred years ago, you would almost certainly have found turmeric somewhere in the kitchen and somewhere in the medicine chest. That overlap was intentional. Traditional healers called it the golden root, and they used it broadly. It was stirred into warm milk for body aches. It was applied as a paste to bruises, skin irritations, and joint pain. It was used in wound care. It was added to foods not just for color, but for its perceived protective properties. Grandmothers in many cultures passed down the knowledge of turmeric the way others passed down recipes because to them, the line between food and medicine was never very sharp. Modern science has zeroed in on a group of compounds in turmeric called curcuminoids, the most studied of which is curcumin. Research on curcumin is extensive and still ongoing. Studies suggest it has significant anti-inflammatory activity, comparable in some research to certain over-the-counter options, though it works through different mechanisms. It has been studied for its antioxidant behavior, its potential effects on joint comfort, and its possible role in supporting digestive health. One important practical note that traditional cooks seem to discover on their own: curcumin is absorbed much more effectively by the body when it is consumed with black pepper. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine that research suggests may increase curcumin absorption substantially. Many traditional recipes that included turmeric also included black pepper, which, in hindsight, looks less like coincidence and more like accumulated wisdom. Turmeric can be added to warm milk or plant-based milk with black pepper and a touch of honey. It can be cooked into soups, stews, rice dishes, and scrambled eggs. It can be made into a simple paste with coconut oil and black pepper for topical use on joints or skin, though patch testing is a smart first step. High doses in supplement form are not equivalent to traditional food-based use and may interact with certain medications. As with all powerful roots, more is not always better. The golden root is not just a spice. It is one of the most studied traditional foods on Earth, and the research is still catching up to what people already knew. Number 4. Olive oil, liquid light. Ancient Mediterranean civilizations did not just cook with olive oil. They anointed with it, traded it, preserved food in it, used it on their skin, and built entire economies around it. Greek and Roman writers documented its uses extensively. It appeared in household records, trade manifests, and medical texts. Olive trees were considered so valuable that in some societies, cutting one down was punishable by law. That is not the behavior of people who simply liked the taste. Traditional healers used olive oil as a carrier for herb-infused preparations. Early farmers used it to protect skin from sun and wind. It was used in hair care, wound care, and consumed daily as a food staple in ways that researchers have now linked to some of the longest-lived populations in recorded history. The modern science of olive oil focuses heavily on its monounsaturated fatty acid content, particularly oleic acid, and on a group of polyphenols, including oleocanthal, which has been studied for anti-inflammatory properties. Research on populations that consume significant amounts of extra virgin olive oil, particularly in Mediterranean regions, has observed associations with cardiovascular health markers, though the full picture involves diet and lifestyle together. Extra virgin olive oil is the least processed form and retains the highest levels of naturally occurring compounds. It is pressed from the fruit without heat or chemical treatment. Traditional households did not have other options. They used what the press produced, which happened to be the most beneficial form. Use it as a finishing oil over cooked vegetables and grains. Use it as the primary cooking fat for low to medium heat cooking. Apply it to dry skin and rough patches as a simple, old-fashioned moisturizer. Look for cold-pressed, extra virgin olive oil in dark glass bottles to protect it from light degradation. The ancient world's most traded liquid was not water, not wine. In many regions, it was this pressed from a fruit that grew on trees that lived for 1,000 years. There is something worth paying attention to in that longevity. Number 5. Ginger, the warming root. Ginger has traveled more of the world than most people have. It originated in tropical Southeast Asia, moved through ancient trade routes into India, spread across the Middle East, reached Egypt and Rome, crossed into Africa, and eventually found its way into European and American kitchens over centuries of trade. Every culture that encountered it found uses for it, which is one of the most telling signs of a genuinely valuable plant. Traditional healers across multiple continents use ginger for similar things, even without any contact with each other. That independent convergence is significant. It suggests that people were observing real effects and passing down what they noticed. Ginger was most widely valued for digestive complaints. Nausea, unsettled stomach, sluggish digestion, and bloating were all conditions traditional medicine turned to ginger for. Sailors in multiple cultures relied on it for motion sickness during long sea voyages. Pregnant women, in many traditional societies, used mild ginger preparations for morning sickness, a use that has since received research attention, with some studies suggesting possible benefit for nausea during pregnancy, though medical guidance should always be followed. Ginger also has a long history of use for warmth and circulation, particularly in cold climates, and for respiratory discomfort during winter months. The compounds responsible for ginger's activity include gingerols, which are present in fresh ginger, and shogols, which develop in higher concentrations when ginger is dried. These compounds have been studied for anti-inflammatory, anti-nausea, and digestive support properties. Fresh ginger root can be sliced and simmered into tea, grated into stir-fries and soups, blended into smoothies, or simply chewed in small amounts for quick digestive relief. Dried ginger has a more concentrated, spicier character and works well in baked goods and spice blends. If this is starting to make you realize how much practical food knowledge has been quietly forgotten, hit the like button. It helps this video reach people who still believe useful knowledge should not disappear. And if you have not subscribed yet, join us here for more practical plant wisdom, health science, and self-sufficient living ideas every week. Now, back to the list. Number 6. Bone broth, the forgotten foundation. Walk into the kitchen of any traditional household from the last 500 years across Europe, Asia, South America, or Africa, and you would almost certainly find something simmering on the fire. Not a quick meal, a slow one. Bones, vegetables, water, and time. Bone broth was not a food trend. It was the foundation. Old homesteaders never wasted a carcass. Every bone that could not be eaten directly went into the pot. They were cracked to release the marrow. They were simmered for hours, sometimes an entire day, to draw out everything the structure of an animal could offer. The result was a rich, deeply flavored liquid that was used as a base for soups, as a warm drink during illness, and as something to give to children and elderly family members who needed nourishment in an easy-to-digest form. Traditional wisdom linked long-cooked bone broth to joint support, gut health, skin quality, and recovery after illness. Modern nutritional research has begun to examine those associations more closely. Bone broth contains gelatin, which forms as collagen breaks down during the long cooking process. Gelatin has been studied for its potential role in supporting gut lining integrity. It contains glycine, an amino acid with a range of physiological roles. It contains minerals including calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus in forms that may be bioavailable. Some research has looked at specific peptides from collagen breakdown and their potential effects on joint tissue and skin elasticity. The key variable is always time. A quick 30-minute stock does not produce the same result as an 8 to 24-hour low simmer. Traditional cooks knew this. They did not rush broth. Use quality bones from grass-fed or pasture-raised animals when possible. Add a small amount of apple cider vinegar to the water at the start, a traditional practice that research suggests may help pull minerals from the bone. Simmer low and slow. Strain, cool, and store. Drink it warm, or use it as a base for everything. It is not complicated. It is just slow. And slow is exactly what makes it valuable. Number 7. Apple cider vinegar. The farmhouse tonic. On old farms across Europe and early America, there was almost always a crock of apple cider vinegar somewhere in the pantry, the cellar, or the barn. It was used for preserving food, cleaning surfaces, treating livestock, and as a health tonic that family members took in small amounts diluted in water. It was not considered exotic. It was considered essential. Traditional herbalists and home healers valued it for digestion. They gave it to people who complained of sluggish stomachs, acid imbalance, and poor appetite. They used it diluted as a gargle for sore throats. They applied it topically to sunburned skin and to fungal issues on the feet. Some old recipe books included in preparations for toning and refreshing tired skin. The active component most often studied in raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar is acetic acid, which gives vinegar its characteristic sharpness. The unfiltered version also contains what is called the mother, a colony of beneficial bacteria and enzymes that give it a cloudy, web-like appearance. Some research suggests that acetic acid may help support blood sugar management after meals by slowing the rate at which carbohydrates are broken down. Other studies have looked at its potential digestive effects and its antimicrobial properties. It is important to understand that apple cider vinegar is acidic and must always be diluted before drinking. Drinking it undiluted can damage tooth enamel and irritate the esophagus over time. 1 to 2 teaspoons in a full glass of water is the traditional amount used before or after meals. Always choose raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar with the mother for traditional style use. Think of it as the farmhouse tonic, humble, old-fashioned, and quietly more studied than most people realize. Number 8. Figs. Ancient sweetness with deep roots. Figs are one of the oldest cultivated fruits in human history. Archaeological evidence suggests they may have been cultivated before wheat or barley. Some findings point to fig cultivation going back nearly 11,000 years. They appear in ancient Egyptian records, in the diets of Greek philosophers and athletes, in the accounts of Roman armies, and in the preserved writings of traditional healers across the Mediterranean and Middle East. They were not just food. They were valued food, special food, food that people went out of their way to grow, preserve, trade, and keep. Ancient healers used figs in poultices for skin complaints, abscesses, and boils. Traditional medicine across multiple cultures recommended them for digestive sluggishness and constipation. Dried figs were packed as travel food by armies and long-distance traders because they were dense in energy and did not spoil quickly. Modern nutritional research confirms that figs are notably high in dietary fiber, which plays a direct role in digestive health and regularity. They contain a variety of minerals, including potassium, calcium, and magnesium. They provide natural sugars alongside fiber, which moderates how that energy is delivered. They also contain phenolic compounds and antioxidants that have been studied for their potential effects on inflammation and cellular health. Fresh figs are a brief seasonal luxury in most climates. Dried figs are available year-round and are easier to store. Traditional uses included eating them as a daily food, cooking them into stews and sauces, blending them with other ingredients to make dense energy preparations, and mashing them for poultice use. They are also remarkably easy to grow in the right climate. A fig tree in a warm, sheltered spot can produce fruit for decades with minimal attention. Old homesteaders who had one almost always protected it carefully. 11,000 years of cultivation is not an accident. Figs earned their place at the table and they have never really left. Number 9. Pomegranate. The ancient doctor's fruit. If you had visited a traditional healer in ancient Persia, Egypt, or the early Mediterranean world, and you had a complaint related to digestion, inflammation, or the health of the gut, there is a reasonable chance a pomegranate would have been part of what you were given. Every part of the pomegranate was used: the seeds, the juice, the rind, and even the flowers. Traditional medicine valued it comprehensively. The juice was used as a tonic drink. The rind was dried and used in preparations for digestive concerns. The seeds were eaten directly. The flower was used topically in some traditions. This was not random. Observation over centuries showed that different parts of this fruit did different things, and traditional healers paid close attention to that kind of detail. Modern research has focused intensely on pomegranate in recent decades. The fruit is exceptionally high in punicolagens, a type of polyphenol unique to pomegranate, and in punicic acid, found in the seed oil. Studies have investigated pomegranate's antioxidant activity, which some research has described as significantly high compared to other commonly studied fruits. Research has also looked at its potential anti-inflammatory effects and its influence on various markers of cardiovascular health, with some studies showing promising associations with blood pressure and arterial flexibility. There is also emerging research on pomegranate's effects on the gut microbiome, which connects interestingly to its long traditional use for digestive support. Fresh pomegranate seeds, also called arils, can be eaten directly and added to salads, grain dishes, and yogurt. Pure pomegranate juice without added sugar is another option, though it is calorie-dense. Dried pomegranate rind has been used in traditional herbal preparations and is worth exploring if you are interested in the full historical picture. For a fruit this ancient, it is still producing new research. That is a sign of something real. Number 10. Lentils. The protein of survival. Lentils have fed civilizations. That is not an exaggeration. Archaeological evidence places lentil cultivation at over 9,000 years ago in parts of the Near East. They were eaten by workers building ancient monuments, by soldiers on campaign, by farmers through lean winters, and by families in times of scarcity when almost nothing else was available. They were valued precisely because they were reliable. They grew in difficult soils, they stored for years when kept dry, they cooked quickly compared to other legumes. They were filling, cheap, and available. But traditional cultures who relied on lentils also noticed something that modern nutrition has since confirmed. They sustained people. Not just in the short-term, satisfied sense. They provided long-lasting energy. They kept people going. Lentils are high in plant-based protein, complex carbohydrates, and dietary fiber. They contain significant amounts of iron, folate, and magnesium. The fiber they contain is a mix of soluble and insoluble types, which research links to digestive regularity, improved blood sugar response after eating, and support for cholesterol levels. Their protein and fiber combination produces a slow, sustained energy release rather than a sharp spike and crash. Lentils also contain prebiotic fiber, the kind that feeds beneficial bacteria in the gut. This is a connection that traditional eaters would not have had language for, but the outcome was something they experienced. Lentil-heavy diets seem to produce resilient, strong people. They can be cooked into soups, stews, dals, and porridges. They can be sprouted for a raw option. They can be dried and stored for years. A 50-pound bag of dried lentils stored properly represents a significant food security resource for a household. In times when meat was scarce, lentils kept people alive. In times of plenty, they kept people grounded. That kind of track record is worth more than any trend. Number 11. Bitter melon. The vegetable most people avoid. This one requires a moment of honesty. Bitter melon is not immediately pleasant to most people raised on modern food. It is, as the name suggests, intensely bitter. It looks unusual, a wrinkled, pale green gourd with a rough, bumpy surface. At markets in many Western countries, most people walk past it without a second glance. But in traditional medicine across South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Africa, and the Caribbean, bitter melon has been one of the most specifically valued plants in the kitchen medicine overlap for centuries. Traditional healers did not grow it for its flavor. They grew it for what it did. It was used primarily for blood sugar management in traditional systems. Long before anyone had language for insulin or glucose, practitioners of Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and Caribbean folk medicine noticed that bitter melon preparations seemed to help people with certain metabolic symptoms. They described it carefully. They passed the knowledge down. Modern research has investigated bitter melon with genuine interest. It contains several biologically active compounds, including charantin, vicine, and an insulin-like peptide called polypeptide P. Studies suggest these compounds may influence glucose metabolism, with some research indicating they could support healthy blood sugar levels. A number of clinical studies have been conducted, with results that researchers describe as promising but still requiring more work to fully understand. It is eaten cooked in stir-fries, curries, and soups in many Asian cuisines. The bitterness can be reduced slightly by salting and rinsing before cooking. Some traditional preparations involve juicing the fresh gourd. Supplements based on bitter melon extract are also available. One important caution: bitter melon may interact with diabetes medications and should not be used as a substitute for medical treatment. Anyone managing blood sugar conditions with medication should consult a healthcare provider before using it. The vegetables most people avoid are sometimes the ones with the longest history of being valued. Bitter melon is one of the more striking examples of that. Number 12. Black seed. The seed with a 1,000-year reputation. There is a seed that has been found in ancient Egyptian tombs. A seed that appears in the writings of early physicians across multiple civilizations. A seed that was traded on ancient spice roots alongside cinnamon and pepper because it was considered that valuable. It is called black seed or Nigella sativa. In some regions, it is known as black cumin or kalonji. It is small, dark, and slightly bitter, with an unusual, warm, herbal flavor. Traditional healers valued it broadly. It appeared in preparations for respiratory complaints, digestive issues, immune support, and skin conditions. Early physicians writing in what we now call classical Arabic medicine described it extensively. It was preserved in oil, mixed with honey, and eaten directly. The oil pressed from the seeds was used both internally and externally. Modern pharmacological research has taken black seed seriously. The primary compound studied is thymoquinone, which has shown antioxidant and anti-inflammatory activity in laboratory and animal studies. Research has also looked at its potential antimicrobial properties and immune system effects. Some human studies have investigated its influence on blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar markers, with results that researchers describe as worth further investigation. Black seed oil is pressed cold from the seeds and has a strong, distinctive flavor. A small amount, typically half a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon, is the traditional daily amount used in food-based approaches. The seeds themselves can be pressed into flatbreads, sprinkled over salads, or stirred into yogurt in the way they have been eaten across the Middle East and South Asia for centuries. This is not a seed that became popular because of marketing. It became valued because enough people, across enough centuries, in enough different cultures, noticed what it appeared to do. 1,000 years of a reputation does not simply disappear. Number 13. Fermented foods. The invisible harvest. The people who developed fermentation did not know about bacteria. They did not know about the microbiome. They did not have microscopes. What they had was observation. And what they observed was that certain foods, transformed through time, salt, and the invisible processes of nature, seemed to do something for the people who ate them regularly. Fermented foods appear in nearly every traditional food culture on Earth. Kimchi in Korea, sauerkraut in Germany and Eastern Europe, kefir and yogurt across the Middle East and Central Asia, miso and natto in Japan, injera in Ethiopia, kvass in Russia, tepache in Mexico. Every culture that developed fermentation did so independently, and every culture that developed it kept doing it, generation after generation, because something about it worked. Modern science now has language for what traditional people observed through experience. Fermented foods contain live beneficial microorganisms, what we now call probiotics, that interact with the human gut microbiome. Research over the last 2 decades has dramatically expanded our understanding of the gut microbiome and its connections to immune function, inflammation, mental health, metabolic health, and overall resilience. Studies on traditionally fermented foods have shown that regular consumption may support diversity in the gut microbiome, which researchers increasingly associate with overall health outcomes. Traditional fermentation also transforms foods in other ways, breaking down compounds that can be difficult to digest, increasing bioavailability of certain nutrients, and creating entirely new beneficial compounds through the fermentation process itself. The simplest entry point is traditional sauerkraut made with just cabbage and salt. Fermented for several days at room temperature, it produces a product that is inexpensive, easy to make, and has a direct line back to the farmhouse traditions that kept families fed and functional through long winters. The invisible harvest was happening in those old crocks and clay pots for thousands of years. Modern science is finally beginning to count what was being grown. Number 14. Moringa, the tree that fed the forgotten. Most people in the Western world have only heard of moringa in the last 10 or 15 years, but in the regions where it grows naturally across South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of Central America, it has been a food staple and home remedy for centuries. Traditional communities called it different things in different languages, but the theme was consistent. It was the tree you turned to when other food was scarce, the tree whose leaves could be dried and stored, the tree whose pods, seeds, flowers, and roots all had uses. In times of drought or food insecurity, moringa kept children fed. Traditional healers in those regions used it for an enormous range of purposes, from nutritional support for malnourished individuals to preparations for skin conditions, digestive complaints, and general vitality. The knowledge was granular and specific, built up over generations. Modern nutritional analysis has revealed that moringa leaves are extraordinarily dense in nutrients. They contain significant amounts of vitamin C, vitamin A, calcium, potassium, iron, and plant-based protein in proportions that are rarely seen in a single plant food. They contain a range of antioxidant compounds, including isothiocyanates, flavonoids, and polyphenols. Research has investigated moringa's potential anti-inflammatory effects, its influence on blood sugar levels, and its antimicrobial properties. For communities experiencing food insecurity, moringa is not a supplement, it is a meal. The dried leaf powder can be added to porridges, soups, sauces, and drinks. The fresh leaves can be cooked like spinach. The young pods can be eaten as a vegetable. In a self-sufficient garden, moringa is worth knowing about if your climate supports it. In a tropical or subtropical environment, a moringa tree can produce harvestable leaves within months and continue producing for years with minimal care. The tree that fed the forgotten is now getting the scientific attention it always deserved. Number 15. Raw cider and wild ferments. The forgotten kitchen chemistry. Before there were grocery stores, before there were canning factories, before refrigeration changed everything, kitchens were laboratories. Not organized laboratories with equipment and precision. Lived in, working laboratories where knowledge was passed down through hands. The knowledge of how to turn surplus fruit into something that would last. How to capture the wild yeasts floating in the air. How to know when a ferment was healthy and when it had gone wrong. How to read color, smell, bubble, and time, the way modern people read nutrition labels. Wild fermented cider, real cider, not the commercial sweetened version, was made in homes and on farms for centuries across temperate climates where apples grew. Surplus apples were pressed, the juice was collected, and wild yeasts, naturally present on the apple skins, and in the environment, began the fermentation process without any intervention. The result, over weeks, was a lightly alcoholic drink that preserved the fruit's value through winter. But beyond cider, the broader category of wild fermentation, using naturally occurring microorganisms to transform foods, was one of the great survival technologies of the ancient kitchen. Water kefir, made with water, sugar, and a culture of bacteria and yeasts, was used in traditional settings as a probiotic drink. Wild fermented vegetable preparations, made simply with salt and thyme, were standard in homesteads across Europe and Asia. Even bread made with sourdough starters maintained for years, sometimes decades, sometimes longer, is a form of wild fermentation that produces a nutritionally different product than commercial yeast bread. Research on wild and traditionally fermented foods is growing rapidly. The complexity of microbial communities in wild ferments, compared to the simpler probiotic products commercially available, is something researchers are just beginning to map. The traditional intuition that wild ferments were healthful may reflect an underlying complexity that single-strain commercial probiotics cannot replicate. Learning to ferment at home is one of the oldest forms of food self-sufficiency, still accessible to ordinary people. It requires almost nothing: salt, vegetables, or fruit, clean water, time, and attention. The forgotten kitchen chemistry is not gone. It is waiting to be relearned. 15 foods. 15 histories stretching back hundreds and in some cases thousands of years. The real lesson here is not that ancient people knew everything. They did not. They made mistakes. They held on to some ideas too long and let go of good ones too quickly. They were human, the same way we are. But they did something that we have largely stopped doing. They paid attention. They watched what grew around them. They noticed which foods made them feel stronger and which ones did not. They recorded what helped during illness, what sustained people through difficult seasons, and what was worth preserving, trading, and passing to the next generation. They were not scientists, but they were careful observers. And careful observation, repeated over centuries, produces a kind of knowledge that deserves respect. Modern research is not replacing that knowledge. At its best, it is meeting it. The studies being published on honey, turmeric, garlic, fermented foods, and moringa are not discovering new things. They are finding the molecular explanations for why old things worked. They are catching up to grandmothers and traditional healers who knew, without the language of biochemistry, that something real was happening. What can you do with this? Start somewhere small. Pick one food from this list. Learn it properly. Grow it if you can. Cook with it if you cannot. Notice it. Pay attention to it the way the people who first valued it paid attention to it. You do not need to overhaul everything. You need to start somewhere. One plant, one practice, one small relearning of something that was always there. Drop a comment and tell me which one surprised you most or which one you already use. I read every comment and I genuinely want to know what connects with people. And if you want more forgotten food wisdom, practical health science, and self-sufficient living ideas, subscribe now. There is always more worth knowing. I will see you in the next video.